All right, and going live in 3, 2, 1.
Bonjour et bienvenue. Welcome everyone to this gathering of the heritage sector on insurance and heritage properties, a great opportunity to review survey findings with leaders from the heritage movement and from the insurance industry. My name is Natalie Bull. I'm Executive Director of the National Trust for Canada. Pleased to be here with a great panelist that we'll introduce shortly. I want to start today by recognizing all of the Indigenous lands that everyone participating today has the privilege of working from and living on. I'm here in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and we urge you to join us in recognizing the contribution of Indigenous histories, languages, and cultures, and such an important part of our shared heritage that we work to preserve. I encourage everyone joining us today to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're participating from. And just a word that this is a gathering. It's not a formal webinar. It's really a working session. And we will invite everyone to participate. You can use the chat or the Q&A to participate in the conversation. You can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question out loud. But also feel free to use those functionalities at the bottom of your screen. We're recording the session today and also recording the chat, and we'll share that within the next 24 hours, as well as an opportunity for you to provide feedback. Aujourd'hui, on encourage l'utilisation des deux langues. Nous avons des présentateurs qui peut-être vont présenter en français et encourage les questions et les commentaires dans la langue de votre choix. We're really wanting to convene a bilingual conversation here today. On the next slide, just a few words about the National Trust and these gatherings, which we use as part of our work to build a strong and active and effective heritage community in Canada. Through sessions like this, through our webinars and at our national conference, and through programs like Launchpad, we are working to empower people in communities across the country to use heritage in ways that creates livable communities and reflects the diversity of our country and helps tell our many stories. One of our top line objectives at the National Trust is to keep useful, older and heritage buildings out of landfill. And we know there are many barriers that make it hard for owners and stewards to do that. And we really see this issue with insurance as one of those barriers. It's interesting when you think about the backstory. When I was arriving at the Trust about 15 years ago, the organization had just done quite a bit of work with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and we felt that we had this issue licked. But I think it is one of those challenges that waxes and wanes, and we'll probably hear more in the session today about why right now insurance has raised its head again as a challenge for heritage property owners. But we know that without action, this challenge of insurance that many owners are facing can and will have an important chill on the owning and the investing in heritage properties. And we know it's not a niche problem. We really see this as a barrier that can get in the way of the retrofitting and reuse of many older buildings, which we know is such an important aspect of action on climate. So a little bit about the backstory. The Trust, as I mentioned earlier, we worked in the past with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and we're very pleased to have on the call with us today. We can move ahead to the list of panelists. Three representatives from the Insurance Bureau of Canada: Marc Lefebvre from the national organization, and Bernard Marchand and Dominique Roy, who are specifically working with the province of Quebec. So they're an important player in this conversation. We're pleased to bring back, after a couple of other webinar and gathering appearances, Colin Robertson from Ecclesiastical Insurance and Steve Beattie from Front Row Insurance Brokers, both important players and great allies for the Trust as we grappled with this question. So thanks to them for being with us today. At an earlier gathering with Steve and Colin present, I think we really got a clear message that we needed data to tackle this issue and to work effectively with the insurance industry. So that's great to have you back today to talk about the results of these findings. And then also very pleased to have Noémie Nadeau, directrice générale des Amis et propriétaires des Maisons Anciennes du Québec, AMPAC. And we've been really pleased to work in partnership with AMPAC and Noémie on both the survey that they completed of property owners in the province of Quebec, which really influenced the survey that the National Trust released earlier this year. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I'm going to hand the session over now to my colleague Chris Wiebe, who is going to talk more about the issue and run through some of the high-level results of the National Trust survey. So over to you, Chris Wiebe.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks to all of our panelists today. Looking forward to a dynamic conversation and looking forward to having hearing from others on the line too. And please, as Natalie said, please raise your hand when you want to speak. And but we'll reserve those kind of questions and that discussion until a little bit later. I'll go through some of the survey results, high level from the National Trust side, and also Naomi will go from the AMPAC side, and then we can open it up for a broader discussion. So really, maybe we should just back up too. I mean, what prompted this whole kind of survey? I guess we were hearing about insurance rate hikes for heritage and older buildings, both residential and commercial, that were happening across Canada. And we had had many emails and correspondence on that file. And I guess the feeling was that a lot of it was anecdotal evidence that was circulating, and that we needed to get more numbers, as Natalie said, around data around what was really happening and where it was happening. So we recognize it's a challenging and important issue, and of course, insurance is required by all if you own property to some degree. And I guess the other challenge for the National Trust and for AMPAC was the fact that insurance issues were perceived to be associated with heritage buildings, and these were somehow helping to dampen enthusiasm, the perception was, for owning and adaptively reusing older and heritage buildings. So we were also hearing from a number of municipalities and provincial official representatives that there was a chill effect happening around heritage designation, and that people were becoming leery of becoming designated for insurance reasons, and also looking to potentially de-designate in some instances. So how did we go about this? How did we go about the survey? Well, as Natalie was mentioning, we built off of the AMPAC survey. And their survey ran roughly from December to January of this year, February. Ours launched in parallel, and it ran from about February to April. It was a little bit elastic there. We had about 930 responses, give or take, and Naomi had about 450 from Quebec in that kind of range. So it was actually quite a good range. We actually had a lot of uptake from across the country, and good results from across the country. So, and from communities larger and smaller, it was not limited to big urban centers by any means. There were a lot of people that were responding from small communities, medium-sized communities. So it was actually quite a good range. I'm not going to go into detail on that today, but quite excited about the reach that it had. So what was the goals of this survey? Well, it really was to assess the pan-Canadian situation, and look at that heritage and insurance files, and think about think ahead to a potential fact-raising, awareness, and advocacy campaign to address some of the issues that were seen to emerge. So those were some of the goals, and we'll try to discuss some of that a little bit later in terms of next steps. Next slide, please. So why don't we just look at some of the key issues and top-level takeaways that we saw there. We don't have time today to dive into all of the aspects of the survey, and in fact, we still need to do a good amount of cross intersectional kind of analysis, and also collation of some of the really rich open-ended results that we had, or open-ended answers that we had to many of the questions. So quite a bit of work there. But here's some of the high-level things. I guess what we found it was that heritage versus older buildings, are they experiencing similar issues? There's quite a bit of evidence to say that it's older buildings generally that are having challenges. It's not just exclusive to capital H heritage designated sites. Be good to unpack that a bit further. There's also the fact that there are cancellation of policies happening and people scrambling to find new insurers. And there are premium rate increases happening across Canada. Sometimes, but we'll get to that slide, but the rates are not astronomical in all instances. I mean, that's happening, but it's actually a kind of a small segment of the market that is actually experiencing very high premium rates. Some of them are more moderate. We can have a look at that in a little bit. But I think we're hearing from the people that are experiencing very big rate hikes. We also heard, I guess, just from sifting through some of the open-ended responses, that there's a need for greater insurance industry transparency around requirements. There was a number of people who have pointed to heritage appraisals, which is basically looking for an assessment of the replacement cost of a heritage building, and that was a new requirement, but there was some fuzziness around what that appraisal looked like, who could do it, who was qualified to do it. Heard about that in a number of instances, particularly from commercial property owners. This whole question of replacement costs, it's interesting. Natalie mentions, I was looking back to some old magazines that the National Trust put out back in 2004, and there were articles talking about the replacement cost challenge that bedevils the kind of the heritage and insurance relationship, even back, almost 20 years ago. So this whole idea of replacing in kind or replacing with like materials, it's something that really needs to be wrestled to the ground and clarified. And I guess just the general comment that these insurance issues were generating in some communities something of a chill effect around heritage and older buildings in terms of dissuading people from embracing ownership there or becoming inclined to explore the idea of de-designation. So next slide, please. Let's dive into the survey. So interestingly, out of the 930 results on the National Trust side, a lot of them were coming up in that kind of 1850 to 1940 age group. And it'd be interesting to see if Noemi looks at that as well, or can illuminate her thoughts there. But there are some interesting results from some of the later periods as well. I think it's also interesting because I think there are, looking into the numbers, there are over 5 million pre-1980s residential units. So that section that says 1941 to 1980, there's also going to be more need to explore that area as well. But the welterweight of things falling in between the mid-19th century to mid-20th century. Next slide, please. This one will be of interest to many people around the designation status of the building. Many people, as you'll see, 45% responded they were designated as an individual property. About 25 were in a heritage district. Another, say 12% were identified as property of interest on an inventory or some kind of aspect there. The interesting slice there is the unknown and also the none of the above. And I think that they provide a really interesting point of comparison that kind of for the heritage properties. And interestingly, doing some cross-sectional analysis of the 222 people who responded to the none or above or unknown, 59 or about 25% said they had experienced insurance problems. So it seems like it seems to indicate that it's not solely a heritage problem per se necessarily, but a larger issue with older properties generally. So that may need to be explored as well. Next slide, please. The other thing that was interesting to see from the survey is that many of these people, almost 50%, have owned their properties for 20 years. So they have a deep commitment, long-term and commitment to their properties, dedicated to them, and that it really expresses their the level of care I would think that they would be bringing to those properties as well. So that doesn't seem to be a factor influencing the challenges around their insurance circumstances either. So next slide, please. Is your property currently insured? Well, most of them are. There was a small percentage that's very interesting to dig into that have actively chosen not to insure their buildings, which is challenging given the requirements around liability insurance per se. But a number of them, when you look through the results there, it was challenges around a heritage property kind of that was flagged by the insurers, and the fact that it was an older building that led them to need to back away from insurance altogether because the premiums that were coming back or their inability to obtain insurance was dissuading them. So that's alarming. It's a small segment, but it'll be interesting to see from the IBC's point of view if there is data around whether that's consistent with data around people not being insured in Canada generally for their properties. Next slide, please. Yes. Well, interesting. What is the degree of satisfaction with your current insurance coverage? This one is interesting when you think about the language, because they may be satisfied with their current insurance coverage. They may not be maybe not be satisfied with the cost of that coverage. But I think it's it looks like most of the people have landed in a good place, even though 40% said they had problems with it. Only about maybe below 20% are actively dissatisfied. So it's an interesting dynamic there that we'll need to dig into a little bit more. Next slide, please. So have you experienced difficulties with your insurance coverage for your property? Well, almost about 40% said they had challenges looking, finding insurance, obtaining, or finding insurance that would be satisfactory for them. So it's not universal. And I think that's one of the things that's circulating out there, is that it's becoming across the board difficult or for property owners, but that's a significant segment. Next slide, please. So if they had problems, for the 40% that did experience problems, we asked them to check the challenges that they could identify and all that could apply. So a good chunk of them said, you can see from the chart, that they had been refused coverage. Many had a policy renewal had been canceled. Others, had to accept unreasonably high rates. So there's some things that need to be unpacked there. And then when it came to the concerns that were leading to these kind of outcomes, the insurance industry concerns that were being raised. Next slide. This is where it gets quite interesting. I mean, the age of the building in these instances was a big factor, 50% of the time. The heritage status was a challenge, 55% of the time. The condition of the building was of lesser issue. Environmental concerns very low as well. So it's interesting that there's a lot of fixation around the age of the building and heritage status here, and that was singled out as being a challenge. Scampering along, three more slides. By how much would you estimate your insurance premiums had increased over the past 5 years? I think we're hearing from some of the people where they have doubled. But if you look at that percentage of respondents, that's actually quite a small percentage, which is about 7%. Most have experienced increases, but they haven't been that high. But I think we've heard quite a bit, quite vociferously from people who have experienced quite high rates of increase. Next slide, please. And here we have this challenge around the kind of the coverage. I guess people, and we can dig into this later with our panelists around the difference between replacement costs and actual cash value. The replacement cost seems to have a lot of issues associated with it. And I know that there was a 2012 Ontario government guidance document on insurance and heritage properties, which explained that if a building, quote, if a building on a heritage property is completely or partially destroyed, the designation bylaw does not oblige the owner to replicate any lost heritage attributes. A replacement building, for example, can be of a different design. But I think this idea of the replacement cost is still, the perception persists, and it still remains entangled with this idea that it must be rebuilt as it was with the same materials. So that's another challenge. Last slide, please, and then we'll pass it over to Noémie. Have you ever had a major insurance claim under this property policy? Well, most never did, but so it's not that seems to be the driver of many of the challenges around insurance, obtaining insurance, or of having policies not continued. It seems that it's some other dynamic outside of those claims that seems to be driving it forward. So much more to unpack, but those are just some high-level insights. Noémie, do you want to take it from here with your insights from your Quebec experience? Thanks so much.
Yes. So I guess you can now all see my screen. Oops, let me just, okay, here you go. Well, so I'm a French speaker. I will do my presentation in English. I think it will be more convenient for most people. And so I don't have many occasions to practice, and insurance terminology isn't really my expertise, so it will be a challenge, but I think it will be more. I'm very happy to be here because the APMAC has been working hard since the last 2 or 3 years on insurance, on the insurance situation, let's call it. And we take every opportunity to talk about it, to shake ideas, and to look for a solution together. So yeah, just a bit about the Amis Propriétaires de Maisons Anciennes du Québec. So as Chris said, it would be friends and owners of old houses in Quebec association. So it's a nonprofit organization. We've been founded in the 1980. And we have approximately 900 members through Quebec. Our mission is to educate, preserve, and enhance Quebec's residential heritage. So our survey was really for homeowners and not for commercial properties or heritage properties, but really for all houses owners. And we have, whoops, I can't. Okay. So we have different activities and services for friends and homeowners. So we've built a very privileged relationship with homeowners. And this is probably why I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can have a look on our website. But the relationship with the homeowners is probably the reason why they turned to us when it came to their insurance issues that they were facing. And also the fact that it's been through appearing in APMAC through the years. So I've put a little abstract from La Lucarne, which is our bulletin that we do quarterly for members. And since 1984, we actually have mentions of the insurance problem or differences for all houses. So we've been working on insurance since quite a long time. And we still have members on the insurance committee that were there at the beginning in that first invitation that we have for the little conference about evaluation and insurance problems. So moving on to 2005, the APMAC did a joint study with the Cégep de Sainte-Foy and IBC. And that kind of led somehow to an insurance program from old houses that we built that was called Héritage, and that was there for about 6 years. And it was interesting. It was one of the options that homeowners had. And then when it stopped, like about 3 years ago, we noticed an increase in insurance inquiries by emails and phone calls that we have from owners saying that they have more difficulties and problems and facing more issues when they try to have either a renewal or a new coverage for their insurance for the home. So I invite you, if you want to know more, or if you wanted to read the full study or the Commission des biens culturels, which is a government institution that did an inquiry about insurance old properties. So you can read that on our website. Of course, it's in French, but Google Translate isn't that bad. So what we consider being an old house would be built before 1940. It's before code, building code. And also it's the date that is used by Quebec government in the law. So it's kind of a mark that is used through Quebec. But the insurance community consider everything that is heritage because we know that we are facing the same problem. And so we would cover about 300,000 properties through Quebec that are residential properties only. So we have a misconception about whole houses, that everything falls into the same big category. And we just wanted to mention that we are working for everything that is built before 1940. We hope we do, but clearly there's different categories and some have more issues and trouble when they're looking for insurance. So I'm sorry that's in French, but we're going to go through it together. So at the bottom, you have 1% of properties that have city status, city regulation that protects and affect them. And then you have 3% that would have a legal status by provincial, so a provincial status. So that makes it up to about just a bit under 4% actually. And then the other big categories, the 88% that has no recognition, no heritage, no any kind of recognition. So that's a lot. And the 9%, we put it up there because we know that they fall into inventories. So they are listed in different inventories, either by a city or by the government. And you can find this information online. And we know that some insurance agents do find the information, and it's interesting that they do. But the fact that they aren't able to understand exactly what this means to be in an inventory, everything that is in this category could move into or be interpreted as being restricted in modification that can be done to the house. And we just had some changes to the law, to the Loi du patrimoine culturel du Québec recently. And now cities will have to, they are required to create those inventory that would probably be online and accessible. So everything that was built before 1940 will be in an inventory within the next 3 years, or should be in an inventory within the next 3 years. So that will increase this amount, that the 9% will probably become, I don't know, something like 20% of whole building. So makes it more and more properties that could be interpreted as being having a recognition or being under a legal status, which would not be the case. So about this survey, of course, we needed to understand better what was the situation. We needed data that wasn't available. So we decided to do our own survey as well. Sorry. And so we got actually, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide there. well, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to tell you verbally. So we had 752 responded, and as Chris said, it was conducted from December 5th to January 16th of last year. We're very happy because we've reached members of the APMAC. About 55% were members of the APMAC, but another 45% weren't members of the APMAC. So that was really interesting to us. Okay, so first thing that was really interesting was that in the past 10 years, 52% of respondents have had difficulties finding insurance coverage. But then this also means that 48% did not have any difficulties finding insurance coverage. So about half of the respondents. Clearly, they're not the ones we're talking to, but we would be very interesting to talk to them. We understood from cross-referencing questions that they could be part of group insurance, or they could be owners of their properties since over 20 years. So that could affect why they didn't have to look for new coverage or to change the coverage. And so they didn't have really to face difficulties. 32% of respondents have been owners for less than 5 years. And we know that they are facing challenges. And then 33% of respondents said their property has no legal protection status. So that gives us about 70% of the respondents that do have a legal protection status, which is more than what would be represented in the overall 300,000 houses built before 1940. So we also noticed that it was interesting to learn about the obstacle to insurance invoked by insurer. The four main reasons are, first one being the construction date. And that points out to the lack of knowledge and the bias about older houses that are considered less well-maintained than others. Yet, according to Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, only 13% of homes built before 1945 in Quebec needed major repairs. So we think that it's really a misconception about old houses, that they always need to, there are more trouble and need to have more to be done. And then and third reason, the unacceptable proposed policy terms and the specific components situation are, to me, they're really connected to each other. Of course, if you have an old electrical system, then it leads to a partial coverage because you may have an exclusion on that. And this, to us, was something that was related to the sustainability of old construction and techniques and materials that last longer, but that insurers consider to be out of date and should be replacing. And this is all about not recognizing the value of the old construction method and the long-lasting materials that are used. It's also not using the fixing instead of replacing. And that's something that interests us because we think that old houses are part of the climate change solution, really. And we need to address that. And then the fourth reason being the heritage recognition, or the recognized heritage environment in which the houses are situated, located. So of course, all of those reasons have an impact on the variation in insurance premium. So we also asked the question, interesting, 3% had a decrease, 38% did not notice any variation, and 59% had a raise. What is significant is that 21% of respondents had an increase of more than 30%, and that is worrying to us. This is less money available to restore or maintain your house. And of course, it's not very attractive to new owners of old houses that could, you have to take that into your budget, of course. Different factors for the raise, of course, the withdrawal of insurers from the market, more and more exclusion for reasons of durability of material, as I mentioned, and the premium that increased not only for old houses or heritage building, but also everywhere on the market. 70% of our respondents said that they had a premium based on replacement value coverage. And this is where the appraisal is interesting. The method of appraisal is interesting. So the replacement value coverage is calculated. The method is usually, so you have, oops, sorry, there's a problem with my PowerPoint, but you still get the idea. So it's based on the reconstruction cost, and I'm sure that the insurance expert here will have more to say about it. So we are working at the moment with an appraiser to better understand what it means, but we feel like the old house are being touched by this, meaning that, so if you appraise a building with their reproduction cost, then it means that you have to rebuild the same with the same techniques and the same material as before. Otherwise, you can use the replacement cost method to evaluate the replacement cost, and that would be using this, rebuild the same component with today's materials and building techniques. And we feel that most insurer considers the obligation to return the insured to the state before the damage, so they are using the reproduction cost to appraise the reconstruction cost, which could be a problem because we feel like many homeowners, because they value the historic and the original value of the component, would accept a replacement instead of a reproduction, because they don't want to have a new looking old component. And because, like we've seen earlier, they have no limitation or restriction about how to rebuild their house. So also remember that most old houses have no obligation to rebuild the original state, as I said. And some homeowners, like 1% in our survey, noted that they had an agreed value policy or an actual cash value coverage. So this would be fixing an amount to when you have a damage. And so 1% is not a lot. Let's say that it's not enough maybe, and it could be a good solution for homeowners because some would rebuild by themselves and would prefer to have a fixed amount for a damage and, let's say, fix the balcony by themselves and just have the money to pay for the material. So we are working on basically two axes, the education, of course. So the insurance professional, but also the homeowners need to be educated on old and heritage. All of the vocabulary, all of the status, all of the recognition needs to be more understood. And then knowing the status and regulation applying to your property would be something important. We talk to homeowners who are not sure, and that's important. And knowing how you can influence the premium you are paying. Maybe you can exclude, you can ask for exclusions, you can have a professional appraiser, or maybe if it's available to you, you can use your group policy. So those are things that we need to share and to better understand in both sides, the insurance and the homeowners. And then we need to develop a suitable insurance product for properties, the reconstruction values based on replacement, not on reproduction, and the legal heritage framework. We are working with the IBC and the Culture and Communication Ministry here in Quebec. And we are looking for the recognition of maintenance work and durability of components. So that will be it for us. Please do not hesitate if you have something to share, if you have an experience, if you have comments, send it through info@maisonancienne.uc.ca. And there's a lot more information as well on our website in French. Thank you.
Thanks, Noémie. This is great. Just thinking about the time, why don't we dive right in here? I'm just going to open it up to our panelists for responses. I'm seeing all sorts of to what you've heard, and I'll dig through the chat here to see what others are asking about. And again, don't hesitate to raise your hand. I'm wondering for the panelists, are there what are you seeing there in those survey results? Are there things that pop out for you before we dive into how do we address some of these challenges?
A couple of things, Chris, I'd jump on right away.
Great.
Just those who are uninsured being that seemed to be 3 or 4%.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people I met in Fort Mac after the wildfire who were proud to tell me, I didn't have a mortgage, I didn't have to have insurance. No, and how'd that work out for you? You know, unfortunately, there are people who think nobody's forcing me to buy insurance, and there is no requirement for anybody to carry property insurance. As far as the satisfaction with their insurance product, I don't think those numbers would be any different for people in brand new homes. That there is a love-hate relationship with insurance. As a friend of mine says, death, taxes, and insurance, the 3 things I can't get away from in life. You know, the 40% that have had challenges, I think you'd come across that with any type of older structure. And as far as replacement cost versus reproduction cost, I don't know anybody who insures for reproduction cost. I don't know any appraiser who appraises to reproduction cost. The only way you can appraise something is what would it cost to replace it with modern materials of like, kind, and quality. And that is what an insurance policy will cover. Now, I'll just jump by saying that the insurance industry, as any financial market, is subject to cycles up and down. I found it interesting, Naomi, that program, the Heritage program, ended in 2020. That's more or less when the hard market hit the insurance industry, where premiums start going up. Risks that were acceptable last year aren't acceptable this year. And it's not just homes, it's commercial, it's right across the entire industry. So it's just a business cycle that insurers go through. That, you know, it goes from what is referred to as a soft market to a hard market, and we are in a hard market right now. And you know, we've touched on it, that it's a question of an old home problem, and that's exactly what it really comes down to, is that the any submission for an older home, if there is any information missing, and what I'm saying is insurers want to know all of the updates that have been done to a house. So certainly if a house was built, let's say turn of the century, clearly the roof will have been replaced multiple times since that home was built, unless it was maybe a slate roof. The electrical systems that were in homes in the early 1900s or even to 1940 did not anticipate microwaves, did not anticipate electric dryers, did not anticipate dishwashers, and all these appliances that we all have now that draw a lot more power and require that the electrical systems be updated. So all that to say that the first thing insurers want to see whenever one of these, an older home crosses their desk, whether it is a heritage home or not, is all the information on the updates: roof, plumbing, mechanicals, heating and ventilation, roofing, and any other information that the insured can provide. If anything is missing, quite frankly, no becomes the easy answer for the underwriter, and they will just deflect those type of risks. So I think that's something that really does have to be kept in mind for anybody, for any older home, whether it's heritage or not. We've seen so many situations where homeowners will try and push to get the designation taken off of their home because I can't get insurance because of the heritage designation. Well, I think if you followed up with them, if they're successful in getting that designation, if you followed up with them 3 months later, they'd find out, yeah, it really didn't help taking the designation off. I still had problems getting insurance. And it's just because they weren't providing the insurer or any underwriter that would look at it with enough information to make the decision. And if there are any holes in that information, they will simply decline the risk. I think another point is that there needs to be proper documentation, and especially if you're going to have 300,000 homes in Quebec go on that inventory, you want to make sure there's something you're giving to those homeowners that they can provide to their insurer to say, here's what I have to do if there was a major loss or if I want to do major renovation. Insurers' biggest concern with anything, the minute they hear heritage, is the unknown. What's going to happen if they have to, if this were a total loss and we had to rebuild? Are we going to have a heritage committee bickering about, well, they need this type of window and not that type of window, and the next thing, we're having to pay a year's worth of additional living expenses for that family until their home is rebuilt, while 6 months of it is determined getting the approval to do it. So really, I think there's something that that should be provided to homeowners, that they can provide to their insurer to say what would be the requirements in the event of a loss. Because for insurers, it's that great unknown. Are we going to be forced to reproduce something? Are we? And needless to say, the contract, the insurance contract, does not cover that reproduction. And I guess the last thing I'd say, I can remember years ago, and quite frankly, I started my career 37 years ago as an appraiser, and I appraised multiple heritage homes. It really doesn't matter whether there's a designation on it or not. It doesn't change how the appraisal is done. You're still appraising it for what would it cost to replace this home with materials of like, kind, and quality today. The insurer is not going to go out and find out architectural salvage and put in 100-year-old windows in a 100-year-old house. They're going to put in brand new Pella windows, if you will, that are the exact style that is required for that type of house. And typically they are made today that will allow for that. But what I certainly remember in appraising homes, and I was in Quebec at the time, was the Quebec government had a fantastic subsidy program for heritage owners. And typically the municipalities had them as well, in that they gave tax breaks to people who were stewards of conservation. From what I understand, all those subsidies and all those tax breaks are gone. So, I think if it was somebody saying, hey, I want that designation to come off of my property because it's causing me headaches, well, I think if they realized their property tax would go up as a result of it, they might not be saying so.
Mark, can I jump in? I'm just wondering, insurance is a provincially regulated, territorially regulated kind of marketplace.
We're provincially licensed, federally licensed, but there is no regulation for what goes into an insurance policy.
So is there a value like that? It seems like that replacement value versus reproduction, whatever you want to call it, that problem needs to be illuminated. Would it be helpful? Would it help clear things up if provinces issued those kinds of definitive guidance documents like the Ontario government did?
I would say no, Chris.
I'm wondering how effective that would be in terms of trying to get at this problem. Maybe we can.
Nobody, as I say, nobody insures to reproduction cost, and nobody appraises to reproduction costs. So I'm not really sure. Now, needless to say, if you've got a house that's all hardwood paneling inside the house, whether it's old or new, that's going to be expensive to replace. But it's not going to be. It's going to be replaced, not reproduced.
Colin or Steve, I'm just thinking outside of do you have thoughts on that whole dynamic, or what Mark has been elaborating on?
Yeah,
I mean, I could.
Colin, I was going to say, Colin, you should speak to your appraisal processes and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of I think there's a lot of myth and misinformation. If it's a significant loss, then it's replacement, it's not reproduction. I'll give you an example. we don't insure private homes, but we do insure commercial property. We insure a number of places of worship, both here in Canada and elsewhere. So if I use the example in the UK, where we insure most of the churches in the UK, and again, the vast majority of which were built before the English Reformation in 1536, right? Those buildings, if I was machining timbers in the 1500s or the 1400s, I wasn't using a sawmill. I was using a handsaw and a saw pit, right? I was using handmade nails. Well, those techniques, they may exist, but they're not going to be used in a commercial application, right? So, even in the finest heritage buildings you see in Europe, if there's any restoration done, yes, it's done in like kind of quality. You'll use, if it's seasoned English oak, they'll use seasoned English oak. If it's limestone, it'll be from the same geological period, but it'll be freshly quarried. It'll be put through, it'll be mainly machine carved. There's also issues around health and safety. So there's certain things you can't do that would have been done, 600-700 years ago. So there is a bit of a myth about reproduction, right? Like, we're not into, I guess, Walt Disney castles or whatever, right? So, I think a little bit of pragmatism needs to come in, and I think it's like anything. I think it's a two-way street. I'm not saying I've had battles with heritage people in Canada, but I've had interesting discussions with heritage, English heritage in the UK, for example, where we were looking to put a fire detection system into a grade 1 listed cathedral, and they didn't want us to drill into the timber to put a fire detection device in. So I kind of said, so you'd rather the building burnt down then, right? So I think it's a two-way street. Yes, I'm sure the insurance industry needs to listen, but I think, we have to be, anybody that has an interest in the preservation of heritage, and look, we're trying to preserve heritage for future generations, you have to be pragmatic, right? And I think sometimes, people get a bit dogmatic, right? And, I think we have to realize that, we're looking to preserve something into the future, and with preservation comes pragmatism sometimes.
I'm just wondering, we're running out of a little bit of time here. I'm just wondering what your advice is on how to change. So we've heard this, we need to digest the National Trust, and I know MPAC needs to as well. We need to digest the survey a bit more. The National Trust is looking to come out with a public response, public media release of the survey results, probably early this fall or later this summer. We'll have to figure out the timing there. I know we also want to strike a working group of people around to look into this issue to help us shape that kind of release and be able to propose some proposed changes. What is your advice from this group here around what would, given your knowledge of how the industry works, what will it need to address this situation, both from a education point of view on the part of the industry, also the homeowners, but also looking to get guidance and direction from the government in terms of clarifying their expectations around designation, etc. What would be your advice in terms of what would be the pressure points, or what would be the key elements that we need to address at this point to change this dynamic that we're seeing?
I'll respond to that if you'd like, Chris.
Yeah, please.
I think I've been a broker now for over 30 years and been through a couple of challenging markets, as Mark was saying, around 2020. What came along with the pandemic was a change in market conditions that had been building, for the year or two leading up to that happening. But of course, those two things coming together made it very difficult. And what we're always dealing with is the perception of risk. As a broker taking an account out to solicit quotations, you're always dealing with what's the perception of the risk that the underwriter is going to have. We try, and I think all brokers who are good at this craft are ones that will really communicate the essence of the account and try and get right into understanding it themselves so they can communicate it to an underwriter. And what we're always trying to do is bring their comfort level up to the point where they can say yes and then quote a fair premium for our clients. The problem you have, and I think you hit it, Chris, when you were talking about heritage versus older properties. A lot of these are getting painted with the same brush, and unfortunately, sometimes older heritage get equated with derelict or vacant or problems, whereas many of the properties that we insure are ones that are gorgeous properties that have been lovingly restored. They do have modern materials in them, but they still have the essence of the heritage. And that, to me, from my experience, is the vast majority. Now, a company like Ecclesiastical is one that embraces heritage. They understand it, they're comfortable with it. But out of, I don't know how many insurers we have in Canada now, but say over 200 insurers, they're just one. And a lot of the insurers simply have a perception that older heritage properties present a poor risk. And they have memories of, going in and to replace a building and uncovering issues because it hasn't been insured to the proper value, or there's issues related to bylaw and reconstruction that all of a sudden, and Mark mentioned this, that it extends out the period of restoration. So if it's a homeowner, then yeah, you've got increased living costs. If it's a business, you've got extended business interruption in the organization's business. So you've got all these factors coming into play. But quite frankly, if you go into it with your eyes wide open, understanding exactly what you're insuring, in my mind, it's no different than insuring a modern structure. In fact, it's cooler than insuring a modern structure. But you have to have more than a few insurers in the country. And unfortunately, when the market hardens and tightens up like it did, it happens really rapidly. And the risks, the accounts that are going to get kicked to the curb. And one of them is going to be heritage. One of them is going to be the older properties. Unless, you look into Ecclesiastical, that actually we've been placing heritage properties with them over the last couple of years because their approach hasn't changed, and not maybe everything will fit their appetite of underwriting. So, I mean, to try and resolve the issues, to try and bring more carriers to the table that can understand it. And when I say carriers, meaning insurance companies that can look at these things a little more objectively and understand and drill and make sure we're getting proper valuations, make sure we've identified some of these issues that could complicate a reconstruction or restoration. Having, as I say, one or two insurers simply isn't enough in a large market like this. And that I think is sort of job one, try and get more insurers to open their minds up a little bit. And be able to, because, Ecclesiastical, Colin mentioned, they don't do homeowners. Whereas, and the problem too, right, is the whole issue of underwriting has gone by the wayside, right? A lot of it is, it's out, I mean, in the personal lines, it's a lot of algorithms and it's a lot of this and that. It's not somebody sitting and really selecting a risk. So if the guideline says this and it doesn't fit the guideline, it's not going to receive a quote, or it's going to possibly not be renewed. And when I look at the chat comments, these are a lot of the problems that people are running into, is all of a sudden, boom, that box gets ticked off. No longer do they have insurance.
I think that's great, Steve. Thanks to all of you. I think we're really at the beginning of this issue. I think starting to have some data and the anecdotal evidence as well that shows up in both of the surveys. And then I think what's exciting to me is seeing in the chat people that I know well who are, heritage insiders, and we understand the system, and we should be in a position to find ways to educate both owners and the industry to make sure that the misconceptions are removed. So I'm really going to encourage my colleagues that I see here with great questions and lived experience, like myself, in being denied insurance for heritage buildings, to really come forward and work with the trust and with AMPAC and other organizations. I think we really need to, we talked about this at our last gathering, we really do need a pan-Canadian working group of people who are committed to wrestling this to the ground, and having our colleagues at the Insurance Bureau of Canada and great allies like Ecclesiastical and Front Row. I think we're really poised to make a difference with this issue. Chris, did you want to, are you looking at questions? Did you want to comment on anything you're seeing?
Yeah, just really quickly, I know we got to wrap up like in the next minute here. There's somebody asking a question around part 5, like a heritage district and a building suffering a loss, and the fact that it needs to go through specific design guidelines and committees. I think that sounds, from what I'm hearing from Mark and others, that sounds like a bit of a damper on enthusiasm for insurers wanting to take on those risks. We'll have to dig into that more closely. There was another question that said, what's the geographical distribution of people having trouble with their insurance? It's interesting. It depends on who responded from a different geographical area, but 52% of respondents from BC said they had challenges with heritage, with insurance, whereas only 30% in Alberta. And the same thing, Southern Ontario, it's more like 38% of the respondents said they had challenges with heritage. Nova Scotia was 20%. So there seems to be these kind of flash areas, and maybe it's people in BC were motivated to respond to this survey. But we've been hearing from those key areas, Calgary, Vancouver, Southern Ontario, Nova Scotia, particularly being flashpoints for this, and wanting to drill further into that to see whether that's the case too. So many other questions. I hope we can get back to them later after,
yes,
perhaps. After
we'll capture the chat and we'll be in touch. So you'll get a follow-up email. Everyone who was registered for this session, we'll give you information about how you can sign up to be part of the next steps of wrestling this important topic to the ground. Great comments there from Annapolis Royal and other places, reminding us of the risk of letting this perception of uninsurability for heritage buildings get out there further. So I think we will wrap it up for today, but looking forward to working with all of you. I'm sure you all join me in thanking our panelists, and we're not going to let them get away. We're going to continue to work with them over the coming period. We could just maybe, if you want to show the next couple of slides, just some upcoming events and activities at the National Trust for Canada. Oh, we'll get back to you with that. Chris, did you want to say anything about next steps aside from, I think really just starting with that working group?
No, I think these are just working group. Next slide, please. Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Thanks so much. The National Trust Conference coming up, Chris is organizing an event that will talk about issues like insurance and other barriers and opportunities for heritage places. And we're going to be in Toronto face-to-face in October. And also coming up, Historic Places Days, a great opportunity to celebrate historic places in your community, July 8th to 31st. And then some opportunities if you to stay connected to what the Trust is up to. We'll give you an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter if you're not already getting it in that follow-up email. And a discount, use that discount code new member if you're not already a member of the National Trust. So thanks again to everyone who participated today and for all those great comments and insights in the chat. Thanks to our great team, and looking forward to working with you on this issue over the coming period. Merci beaucoup tout le monde, à la prochaine.
Thank you, merci.
Thanks so much.
Merci, au revoir.